Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Event Space. You are tuned in to Intro to Lighting Part 2. Today we're talking about constant light. Of course, this is a 5-part series hosted by Sony, so huge thank you to them. And starring Sony Artisan of Imagery, Tony Gale, who does a better job at all of this than me. So Tony, I'm just going to turn it over to you, let you do your thing. We'll drop a link in case you guys missed Part 1 so you can catch up. And I hope you do get some questions in. So to everybody out there watching on YouTube, welcome. Feel free to enter your questions, and Tony, I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A.
All right, sounds good. And who knows if I do a better job or not than you. We got to see you do one of these, and then we'll see. As Derek said, if anybody does have questions, please include them. I know in the past, people have told me they had questions that they didn't ask, so please ask. I am Tony Gale. I'm a Sony Artisan of Imagery. As Derek said, this is our second part of our Intro to Lighting series on constant lights. Thanks to the B&H Event Space, and of course Sony for having me. Without those two wonderful companies, we're not here. Just in case it comes up, in addition to being a Sony Artisan of Imagery, I'm also a BenQ ambassador, a Manfrotto ambassador, and an X-Ray Colorado. And I am primarily a people and portrait photographer based here in New York City, shooting for a variety of editorial, corporate, and advertising clients. Upcoming, we have parts 3, 4, and 5 of this series, and then a few other things we're planning. Part 3 is speed lights. That's on May 6th. Part 4 is strobes on May 20th. And then part 5 is mixed lighting on June 3rd. Some of the things I'd like to talk about on every one of these. Sony's Alpha Universe website, if you're curious about photography, which you must be because you're here, or filmmaking or anything else, whether or not you use Sony cameras, it's a great resource to get inspired and learn about various things, alphauniverse.com. Additionally, Sony has the Alpha Universe forums that are available through alphauniverse.com. They're free. It's a good place to ask questions, share your work. People are nice. It's moderated. It's not like some places on the internet can be. There's also the Sony Alpha Female Plus program, which is on Facebook, Sony Alpha Female Plus. You do not need to identify as female to join the Facebook page, to join the group. And then additionally, they do a micro grant every week of $500. Anyone in the United States, I think, can enter and win that. You don't have to identify as female for that either. Also a very friendly group. Also, just want to point it out, there's so many cool things. I'm going to be talking about some of the cameras and lenses I'm using, but there's so many great things available. It is a wonderful, fantastic time to be a photographer. The tools we have available to us are incredible. I'll obviously talk about that a little bit, but what we can do now, the ease with which we can experiment and try things compared to the film days, it's fantastic. Sony just announced a few weeks ago the new 24-50 2.8G lens is a compact lens. It's designed to be small. That's why it's 24-50, straight 2.8. I have an Alpha 7 CR, for example. It's a great pair with that. It's just a nice walking around camera. The 300 2.8, people have been waiting around for that for quite some time, and it's finally available and awesome. And of course, the Alpha 9 III, which I will be talking about even more on the next part of this once we start talking about flashes and speed lights and strobes. Fantastic camera, game-changing. We'll get into that. Also, Sony Imaging's Pro Support Program. If you are someone who shoots with Sony and is making some money, you don't have to be a full-time professional, but you have to be making some money. The Pro Support Program is great. There's a minimum gear requirement. It's all available on alphauniverse.com. But for $100 a year, you get 3 complimentary cleaning checks a year where they'll pay the shipping both ways. And I believe you can send in 2 things per cleaning check. So you can send a camera and a lens 3 times. You get a discount on out of warranty repairs. You get a 3 business day turnaround. You get free shipping to and from repair facilities. If they can't get you your stuff in 3 days, they'll send you a loaner. It's a really great program. All right, I mentioned we're in an exciting time to be a photographer. When I started photography, when I wanted to do something like experiment with lighting, I do a bunch of things, process a roll of film, hope that I took really good notes so I knew what frame was what, and then try and figure it out. Now you can take a picture, see what worked, take another picture, see what worked. and just experiment, iterate so much more easily. The learning curve has really been sped up. All right. Intro to lighting part 2, constant lighting. Constant lights can be really beautiful. I use more strobes than constant lights, but there are reasons to use constant lights. And we'll get into that. So as I said last time, which was daylight, lighting is a big topic. All light sources have similarities, and there will be things that I'm going to duplicate probably in all 5 parts of this, because maybe you only care about this one or the last one or the next one. And I don't want to assume that people are necessarily watching them all or in order. But in general, you have natural light, sunlight, you have available light, which are whatever lights happen to be around you. You have constant lights, which is our focus today, which overlaps a little with available light. Speed lights, which we're going to get to, strobes and mixed lighting. They're all similar. They can vary in color, intensity, shape, consistency, controllability, etc. But once you start understanding light, some of that will translate to whatever light source you're using. So why might you use constant lights? They're easy to see, especially with a mirrorless camera, because you've got that live view. So if you change your color temperature, if you change the intensity, anything like that, you're seeing exactly what the camera's seeing. You know if it's overexposed, you know if it's underexposed, you know if the color's right, you know if the color's wrong. They can be beautiful. You can get really beautiful constant lights. They can be inexpensive, especially compared to strobes. Depends on what you're getting. And one huge advantage to constant lights is if you're shooting both still photography and video, you can use the same lighting for both. If you're only shooting stills, you could use strobes, sure. If you're shooting video, you can't use strobes, so you need a constant light. Why might you not want constant lights? They may not be bright enough. Compared to a strobe, a constant light isn't as bright for the same amount of power. Constant lights tend to have more potential for color variability. So you may have a bunch of lights that say they're all daylight balanced that don't match. And constant lights can overheat more easily than a strobe, especially if it's a tungsten light and incandescent light. All right, let's talk about quality of light versus quantity of light. This is something that I'm going to go over in each one of these. Quality of light is the character and softness or hardness of light-ish. So is the light indirect or direct? Is it modified? Hard light on the left, soft light on the right. They're both constant lights. The one on the left was a 2000 watt Fresnel, about this big around. The one on the right was 2 fluorescent light banks. You can see it's still a very contrasty thing, but the sharpness of the shadow line is much harder on the left. That was a hard light. Softer on the right. That was a softer light. And then, of course, you have quantity of light. So how much light is there? Is there a lot of light, like the one on the left that's very overexposed? Less light, like the one on the right that's properly exposed? So quantity of light, quality of light. An important thing to understand about quantity of light and constant lights is there's a huge variety of range in how controllable a constant light is in terms of quantity of light. Some of them can be controlled, some of them it's on or it's off. So I'm going to go over quickly just sort of what's available in fluorescent lights. Obviously, this isn't comprehensive because we don't have 400 hours to go over everything that exists. But just looking at the B&H website, you have fluorescent lights. For a while, those were quite popular. Kino Flows were a really big brand, the fluorescent banks I had. These days, I really don't see many people using fluorescent lights anymore. Most of it's moved to LEDs. You have HMIs, also used to be quite popular. They were popular because they were a constant light source that was more powerful than an incandescent and available in daylight balance, but quite expensive. These are much less expensive than they used to be. But I haven't seen anybody use an HMI in quite some time either. You have tungsten lights, which is very old school. I have a few tungsten lights. That's the classic hot light. You've got a tungsten bulb, an incandescent bulb. You put it in there. When people talk about hot lights, this is primarily what they mean is tungsten lights because they get very hot. There's a ton of variety of those. I'm mostly going to be focusing on tungsten or incandescent lights and LEDs. So one advantage of tungsten lights is that they generally have consistent color. Generally, they can be quite inexpensive, and you're not necessarily getting poor light quality from an incandescent, less expensive light. You could be. It's just going to depend on the light. They're relatively simple and easy to use. However, the bulbs can be quite fragile, especially when they're hot. They can get very, very hot enough that they can set something on fire or melt something. I've certainly melted things and had things start smoking because I had a hot light too close. So be careful of that. And then they need a lot of power, especially as you get brighter ones. They're much less efficient than something like an LED would be. They do have the advantage of no flicker, and we'll talk about flicker in a bit. Not technically, not that they don't flicker. When I get to flicker, I'll explain it. But because of the nature of tungsten lights, even though it flickers, the filament never gets really dim, so you don't see it. And there's things like this clamp light here. When I first started doing photography in the 90s and didn't really know what I was doing before the internet was so big, these were the kind of lights I started with, just buying clamp lights and screwing a light bulb onto them. They're inexpensive. They don't have a lot of control, and you're really limited in how bright of a bulb you can put in them because the fixture itself could melt. But they're cheap. Like if you've never, ever experimented with lighting and you're not sure you want to, it's something that you could try. This was with a clamp light. This was with a 500-watt hardware store halogen. You also have things like this, the Angler Shadow Focus. All of the lighting brands and lights that I mentioned, I have no affiliation with. I'm just talking about stuff I've used. Your mileage may vary. Try what you like. But the English Shadow Focus is an example of a light. It's $100. It's 300 watts. It's got a little bit of focus, which allows you to go from spot to flood a little, and it's got the barn doors. I also have some loaded total lights, which are old school. People were using these in the 90s. This will be 300 watts, depending on the bulb you put in. This can go up to 750 or 1,000 watts. So it's much, 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 much brighter and also inexpensive. And then the clamp light I mentioned, you can get an incandescent bulb for $8. The total light, 750 watts. Then we have LED lights. So LED lights come in a wide range of things, and they've come a long way. When LED lights first came on in the picture, they were really not very bright, and the color tended to be all over the place. Having inconsistent color may not matter so much if you're using one light, but if you're using more than one light, you can really see it. If one is a little green and one's a little magenta and you see them together, you're going to see that difference. But they've come a long way, and there's a ton of options out there. There's things like this one in the upper left. It takes a bunch of modifiers. There's the standard, little panels, ring lights, all sorts of cool stuff. LED lights typically don't get very hot. They'll definitely can get warm, but usually not hot. There's a ton of options of what's available out there. There's a huge price range. The color can be all over the place. We're going to talk about what to look for with that, but especially if you buy a very inexpensive LED, there's a trade-off for that less money. They can have a lot more control than an incandescent typically would. They can get complicated depending on what you're getting. They're much more energy efficient for the amount of light that they put out than an incandescent is. And they may have flicker, which again, we'll talk about. So, here's an example, the Nanlite 300B bicolor LED monolight. When I did this screenshot last week, it was 240. Bicolor means that it can do daylight or tungsten, and typically a bicolor, daylight or tungsten color balance, and typically a spectrum in between. And it's dimmable, and it can take modifiers. This will take S-mount modifiers or Bowen's modifiers, so you can put all sorts of fun things on there. Or you've got something like the Luxley Cello here. Similar price point. This, much smaller light, it's not as bright. It'll take batteries, and in addition to being daylight or tungsten balance, it's also an RGB panel, which means it can do almost any color you can think of. You want purple, it'll do it. You want red, it'll do it. You want blue, it'll do it. You want yellow, it'll do it. You just dial it in and you've got all sorts of fun things with that. Or you have something bigger like the light panels Astra bicolor again, tungsten or daylight, and with a spectrum in between. This one, for example, 300 to 5600 degrees Kelvin. It's bigger. It's about 17 by 16 inches. So people tend to use these things more for video and doing things like talking heads and newscasts and things like that. I have 3 Manfrotto 1x1s. Manfrotto doesn't make the 1x1s anymore, and they're great. So when you're looking at lights, you want to take a look at some of the specs. So if you go to the B&H website, look at the specs, tell you what kind of light it is. It will tell you if it includes any modifier. So this NAND light has a reflector, no storage case. The photometrics, it tells you how bright it is. That's useful to a point, but it's a little bit like with speed lights. We'll talk about next time. Not everybody's measuring things in the same way, so it's hard to do apples to apples. The color temperature on this will do 2700 degrees Kelvin, which is quite warm. The standard incandescent or tungsten white balance is 3200, all the way up to 6500 Kelvin, which is a little bit cool. Standard daylight is usually around 5500 degrees. The CRI is 96, the TLCI is 97. We'll talk about those in a minute, but they're very important. You always want to look at those numbers. Built-in dimmer, so 0 to 100%. The beam angle with no reflector, 120 degrees, with the reflector, 55 degrees. Bowens S mount, it'll take a remote. Takes AC power. It's a 350 watt draw, so it gets quite bright. And then here we mentioned the, it'll tell you the lumens, 22,285. That can be useful to know to compare apples to apples. And then the lux and various things, we're going to skip that. But if you're comparing different lights, so we've got an LED light panel on the left. We've got an LED ring light on the right. There are things that are there, but what you don't see with either of these is the CRI, the color rendering index. So when that happens, just be aware that it might not be there for a reason. So you've got here the NAND light on the left, color accuracy standard, right there above dimming, CRI of 96, TLCI of 97, right above dimming on the light on the right, which I left out the brand on purpose because I don't want to speak ill of anything. I haven't used it, so I can't say. There's nothing there. So the NAND light is telling you that the CRI is 96 and the TLCI is 97. The other light is not telling you anything. That could mean that it's not very good. It could also mean that they just didn't test it. So CRI is color rendering index. Generally, you want 90 plus. If you can get 95 plus, it's even better. The max is 100. And more or less, the rule of thumb is if it's 90 or better, you shouldn't have to do any color correction, assuming you white balance correctly. TLCI is television lighting consistency index. It's more obviously for TV cameras. Generally 85 to 100, and again, 90 plus, even better. All right, so let's talk about controlling constant lights. It's going to vary by the light, as I mentioned. There's such a huge range. But pretty much any light, if you move the light closer or further, it gets brighter or darker. Makes sense. If you put you can put something between the light and your subject, even if you can't mount it to the light. So something like a tungsten light can't take very many modifiers because it gets too hot. But you can put something 2 feet away, 3 feet away, depending. You may be able to dim or brighten the light. That's most LEDs. You may be able to change the color. That's some LEDs. Typically, incandescents are not going to let you dim or brighten them or change the color because they're just the color they are. You can sometimes put a dimmer onto a tungsten or incandescent light. I used to assist photographers that would do that. If you dim a tungsten light, though, the color gets warmer. Like most of our houses don't have any incandescent lights anymore, tungsten lights. But if you have a dimmer and you have a tungsten light at home, an old school light bulb, if you dim that light switch on the wall, you'll see that the color from the light actually gets warmer. Let's do a quick side about color. So I mentioned tungsten or incandescent light is typically 3,200 degrees Kelvin. LEDs can be RGB, so red, green, blue, any color in between. Tungsten balanced, 3,200 degrees Kelvin-ish. Daylight balanced, 55 to 6,000 degrees Kelvin-ish. And sometimes LEDs are some mystery color with a green magenta shift. And now let's talk about banding. So if you're using a camera with electronic shutter, silent shutter, and you're not using the Alpha 9 III, which has no banding because it's a global shutter, which is magic, you may have banding. So banding, you can see here, is where there's dark lines. That's caused by the flicker of the light itself. So if you're using a light with alternating current, which is anything you plug into the wall, because the current is alternating, it's on, off, very, very, very quickly. And that's what causes that banding, is you're seeing that flicker as it goes on and off, on and off. If it's an incandescent, you're probably not going to see the flicker because the light doesn't cool off fast enough for the filament to get dark. Lights using direct current, such as a battery, shouldn't have banding. I'm tempted to say they won't have banding, but you never know. They're not supposed to because there is no alternating current, so there's no flicker turning on and off. Better lights typically are flicker free and they control for it. In the United States, that flicker is 60 hertz. So 60 times per second. In most other countries, it's 50 hertz. Where that's useful is sometimes you need a multiple of that to control. So here we have ways to control that. So left, we've got 500th of a second, center's 250th of a second, right's 1/25th of a second. Top row is electronic shutter, bottom row is mechanical shutter. You'll notice in mechanical shutter, there's no banding on any of them. The easiest way to get rid of banding is just to switch to mechanical shutter if you can. If you can't, some cameras, most of the Sony cameras, will have a setting that will help try and time it and alleviate it. It'll try and do some magic inside the camera and adjust for that, usually with shutter speed. It's not magic. It won't be able to do anything, again, unless you have the Alpha 9 III, which won't have banding. The next simplest thing is just to make your shutter speed longer. So at 500th of a second, there's pretty pronounced banding. 250th, if it's there, 1/25th, it's gone. So by going to a longer shutter speed, everything's sort of evening out and it can get a little bit better. So longer shutter speed or mechanical shutter, those are the two easiest things. Most of the demo shots I did for this presentation were with the Sony Alpha 7R5. One of my favorite cameras, great camera, and the 2470 2.8 GM2 lens, also great lens. So let's start controlling the light. The easiest first thing to do is just to move the light. So this is with the angular tungsten. Camera's not moving, little wooden car, just moving the light around. So here it is on the left. On the right, it's more frontal. You can see the shadow moving. You can see where the highlights move. Just moving it all around. You can see, however, starting here and here, as I move it more frontal, you're seeing the shadow in the foreground from the hood of the lens. I could have taken that off, but I thought it was a useful thing to see. So as you're moving light, you want to make sure that nothing is getting in the way of the light that isn't what you want. But there's a lot of different ways. That's the simplest, easiest way to control light is just to move it. If you move it closer, it's brighter. You move it farther away, it's darker. But also, wherever you set it the first time might not be the best visually positioned for that light. So for example, here, I actually like the last one, the one on the lower right. I think that's the coolest. The light here is quite low. So it's below, it's right at the level of the table. It's actually a board on a sawhorse. So very little light is hitting the top of the table, but it's hitting the car. More dramatic. I like that one. All right, so you can also move the light nearer, farther, as I mentioned. So on the left and on the right, all that's changed is that the light has moved closer or farther. So on the right, it's the farthest. In the middle, it's the closest. On the left, it's the medium distance. You'll notice that aside from whatever other changes there may be, like the shape of the shadow. You can see it got longer as it moved further away. Also, the effect on the background changes. It's because of something called the inverse square law, which is as the distance between the subject and the light changes, the amount of speed with which the fall off changes is different. We're not going to get into that too deep, but if you want to make your background darker compared to your subject, paradoxically, if you move the light closer to your subject, the fall off will be more dramatic and the background should get darker. If you want the background to be brighter, you can move the light further away, and then the difference in tone between your foreground and your subject will be more similar. Obviously, you'll have to adjust your exposure to correct for that, because as you get further away, everything gets darker, but the difference in tone will change. You also have here, this is with the Generate LED. Light's closer, light's further away. You can see it's brighter, it's darker. Also, the shape and the character of the light of the shadow changes. You can change what's on the light. So now, this is just the bare light. This is now the light with a 5-foot umbrella. So harder, softer, we talked about character of light. Now we've moved the umbrella even further away. Now we've moved the umbrella more to the side. So these two were sort of a 45-degree angle. Now it's more to the side. Changing again. So just the physical position of the light, huge difference. Brighter, darker, more flattering, less flattering. Then we have flags or barn doors. So again, with the angler, because it has those barn doors open on the left, meaning they're not affecting the light. Barn doors closed on the right, where it is affecting the light. What you can see, the biggest difference, the table changed a little because a little bit of less light is spilling off anything but the car, but the background is dramatically darker. That's because the barn doors have closed, flagging off the light, so it's not hitting the background. So closed on the left, open on the right. The light also can flood or spot, so the beam gets wider or narrower. So closed on the left, flood on the right. It's not a huge difference. There are high-end lights that flood and spot dramatically. The Angler is a $200 or $100 light, which is great, but it's not a huge flood or spot. But you can, I don't know how well you can tell, but when it's flood, the background got a little bit brighter because there's more light spilling around. We could add a reflector, which are typically white, silver, gold, or silver, gold stripe, sometimes with a black side, depending on what you're getting. Some reflectors, 2 sides, usually white and either white, silver, or gold, or silver, gold stripe. You can also get things that are 5-in-1 or 7-in-1, where you've got usually a diffusion in the center and then removable covers that you can take on and put off and flip around. So here, the Toda with a shoot-through umbrella. No fill on the left, white fill in the middle, silver fill on the right. You can see the silver fill is dramatic. The white fill is still pretty dramatic, but the silver fill is very, very dramatic. And here you can see how close those fill were. So white on the left, silver on the right. We're going to talk a little bit more about color. So we talked about color temperature in degrees Kelvin, 3200 for tungsten. 5,500 degrees for daylight-ish. RGB, almost any color. Green, magenta is something where you'll see the light turn green or magenta. It's not always controllable. So a bicolor light will let you control the color temperature, which is warmness or coolness. In degrees Kelvin, sort of orange to blue. The green magenta shift, usually you can't control it. If you have a light with much of a green magenta shift, that's a bummer, but you're going to want to keep an eye on that. So to give you an idea of what the differences are, on the bottom, I've white balanced for 6,500 degrees Kelvin using a gray card. On the top, I've white balanced for 2,700 degrees Kelvin using a gray card. But you can see if you're white balanced for tungsten and you're at 6,500, everything's very blue. If you're white balanced at 6,500, and you're shooting at something that's 6,500, everything looks neutral. And then there's that spectrum in between all the way to the right where we're white balanced for 2,700 degrees. And this 6,500 degree light looks quite warm. So you want to think about your color. This is 2700, 6500 just balanced correctly. All right, we're going to talk about modifiers a bit. There are a lot of options. There are more modifiers than there are lights by a lot. They're very light dependent. So like I mentioned, tungsten lights can't handle very many modifiers. That total light, you can get a kit with a shoot-through umbrella, but it's a shoot-through umbrella that is designed to work with the total light and can take the heat, and it would still burn if you got it too close. So tungsten lights have very few options. Always check and make sure that any modifier you're putting on a tungsten light is designed for that. And even if it is, keep an eye on it. If you see smoke, turn it off. So here's a total light with no modifier. Total light with a small shoot-through umbrella. That's a pretty big difference, right? You can see much harder light. The quality of light is hard on the left. Quality of light is soft on the right. Which one you like better? That's a subjective thing. There is no such thing as the right modifier, because different people can disagree. Reasonable minds can disagree. The right modifier is the one that does what you want it to. If it doesn't, then it's wrong. Here's a Nanlite Forza 150B with a 7-foot white bounce umbrella. So here you can see it's dramatically softer than this Totem with a small shoot through. Much, much softer. So small shoot through on the left, 7-foot umbrella on the right. We showed you these before, but to put them side by side, just the reflector on the left, large white bounce umbrella on the right. The Nanlite with the standard reflector, Nanlite with no reflector. So I didn't change the exposure, just so you could see the difference. The reflector really focuses the light, and you're going to get more power focused on a specific spot. Here, because there's no reflector, it's spreading around more, and you're getting less light on your subject. Then correcting for the exposure. So with the exposure correcting, you don't see much of a difference between no reflector and a standard reflector, because they're both pretty hard. Here you go. Now let's talk about Fresnel. It's one of my favorite modifiers. So Fresnel is a piece of glass that is, I assume, cast in that shape, and it focuses the light in a really powerful way. So here's the light with the Fresnel. Here's the light with the Fresnel focused. So the Fresnel allows the light to focus. You can rotate it or move the light. It depends on how the Fresnel is designed. Some of them, the light fixture moves, the Fresnel stays put. Sometimes the Fresnel moves and the light fixture stays put. But you can get a very dramatic, efficient use of light with that. So Fresnel wide, Fresnel tight, Fresnel very tight. I love Fresnels. I think they're one of the coolest things. There are hot lights that have Fresnels. Usually they're all built together. You can see here, this is tight. This is even tighter. So tight, in fact, that if you look at the little orange pilot in the airplane on the left, you can see he's getting darker because the beam has gotten so narrow that he's getting cut off. Or she, I don't know. It's an orange person. Another thing you might want to think about is texture. So you may want to accentuate the texture of whatever you're photographing. You may want to see that texture, or you may not want to see that texture. You know, often with people's skin, we don't want to see the texture because none of us have perfect skin. With this salt here, maybe you do. So this is with a 7-foot umbrella. This is 7-foot umbrella moving the umbrella. So you can see the tone changed. This is moving the umbrella closer. This is the same light with just the standard reflector. You can see, you see a lot more texture here, right? Because the contrast is going up. Moving the light again, moving the light again, moving the light lower. So generally, to get a lot of texture, you want a hard light, and you want it to skim the surface. So with the umbrella, because it's so big, it's wrapping around and you're not seeing the texture in the same way. Once I started using the reflector, I lowered the light, lowered the light, lowered the light closer to the surface. Now the shadow side gets so dark that you'd probably want to fill it with something, but you're starting to see more and more texture. because what allows you to see the texture is the highlights and the shadows. There's also reflections. So you may want to photograph something metallic or something with reflections. It's metal, it should reflect, right? Well, it does, but the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection, which means the angle that a light source hits something is the same angle that that light bounces off at. It's the same as if you're playing pool. You know, if you're doing a bank shot, the ball hits the side of the pool table, it bounces off at that same angle the other direction. Light does the same thing. So here I have a light. You can tell by the shadow that it's to the right of the camera, sort of 45 degrees. We're seeing some reflection in the Leatherman because it's curved and because of the shape of it. But for the most part, you look at this and it looks lifeless, right? It's not very exciting. Typically with something shiny, you want to see some reflection. So here I've moved a second light around. Now that second light is behind the Leatherman, directly opposite the camera, bouncing off of it so that the light bounces off the Leatherman and into the camera. So you get that very strong reflection. But I think this is too specular. The top part of the handle is too bright. So now I've added a diffusion. So we talked about reflectors. Some reflectors can have a diffusion panel in the middle or just diffusion. I put some diffusion in there, so that softens the light, it spreads it out, it's much more flattering. I don't love the double shadow. So here, I've turned off the main light, the light I started with, and I'm just using the light from the back with the diffusion, which I think is more interesting. Because the fact that not all of it is reflective is fine, but I think this is a more cool shot. All right, let's talk about some exposure comparisons. So this is the Forza at 100% power with the Fresnel, 1/60th of a second, f16, ISO 100. Similar, same light, or not the same light, different light in the same position. Forza LED, angular tungsten, f16, 1/60th of a second, 0.3 seconds, f8. This is dramatically brighter. Even though the wattage, the Forza is about, I think it's about 300 watts. I should double check that. I could be wrong. The angular is about 300 watts. The LED is much more efficient. And with the Fresnel, it's focusing light more. So if power is what you're looking for, if the most light for your money, or the most brightness for your money, an LED is probably the answer. Then we have the Toda, 750 watts, so it's brighter, 0.3 seconds to a quarter second. Still pretty dramatically different. Let's talk about background and foreground. One of the things that is often overlooked when we're starting lighting, I certainly overlooked it, the amount of things I thought I knew when I started that I had no clue about and thought I understood and I was wrong is astounding. You know, we all, hopefully we never stop learning, right? So what I know now should be dwarfed by what I know in 10 years. And what I know now is much more than what I knew 10 years ago, which is more than I knew 10 years before that. But one of the things that's important to think about is your subject is one thing and your background is another. So here we have on the left our actress friend. We've got a Light in Motion CLX10 light with a little small Fresnel adapter. We're getting that dramatic shadow. Maybe I want a little bit less dramatic of a shadow. So on the right, I've added another LED that generated to the background. It's softened that shadow on the wall. You can see it's less dark. It's also softened the edge of that curve. But it may be a little hard to tell. The Light in Motion and the other light are not quite the same color, even though they're both daylight. And that can get be a tricky thing. Like it's a little, doesn't quite match. We've got our cool wooden toys. Maybe we want some more light on that background. Boom, just add a light. So lighting them separately is the secret. One light for your foreground, one light for your background, or however many. I would start with 1 and 1 and then see what you need. But having them controllable separately is the simplest thing to do. This is what it looks like with just the background light on. So you can see by just having the background light on, there's still a lot of spill from the foreground light on the background, but we've brightened it up a lot with that background light. There's also edge lights. So edge lights can help if you have a dark background. They can just be cool and fun. Here I have two of the Light Motion CLX8, the Stella CLX10s with their little Fresnel attachments coming in from the sides and the back. So you're getting that edge on her. Then on the front, I have a Pro Photo light, one of the, I think it's the B10X. I think it's a B10X Pro, which has a quite bright LED modeling light, which also can be controlled between tungsten and daylight. So here, everything's daylight. The two lights on the side, the edge lights. If you're only going to do one edge light, I like to do it on the side opposite the main light. So main lighting from the left, edge light from the right, or vice versa. However, I know people that really like to edge light from the same side that their main light's coming from. Try what works for you. But, so maybe you want to mix it up. Because I can control the color between daylight and tungsten of my Pro Photo modeling light, I've made it tungsten here. So now effectively, and balanced for that tungsten, and that effectively makes the two Light Motion lights left and right very blue, which adds some drama, which I like. Another cool thing you can do with constant lights, you can also do it with flash, but it's much harder, is light painting. So light painting is, you have the camera on a tripod generally. It would be even more difficult if it's not on a tripod or sitting still. You do a long exposure, you take a light source and you move that light source around. Light painting is really hard. To be honest, I'm not great at it. But I'm going to show you some examples so that you can go out and play because it's fun. So this is the Alpha 9 III with a 24-105 f4G lens at f16, 15 seconds, ISO 200 of some little blue flowers on our lawn. This is what it looks like with a, and this is with a flashlight, just a standard flashlight, a very bright standard flashlight. This is what it looks like with the flashlight off. I like to do a control in these situations to make sure that I'm not getting any light that I don't expect. So 15 seconds with a flashlight off. It's dark enough outside, you can't see anything. And then I tried a bunch. As you can see, some of them were more successful than others. I don't think any of them are all that noteworthy, but it's a good exercise and a good way to see what's possible and how it can be easy to overlight when you're doing light painting. And there's no reason it can't be a much larger thing. The red in that middle on the top is because the flashlight itself has a red circle around the top that lights up when it's on, and I wasn't thinking about it and didn't cover that circle, so you're seeing the red there. But you can see some of them are pretty cool. The first one I showed you, this one, it can be a fun look. It's worth trying. And then let me just show you some examples of some constant light stuff I've done. This was during COVID. I did a self-portrait every day for 80 or 90 days. So daylight balanced light on the left, constant light. RGB LED light on the right, set to blue. So we've got a very blue edge light. This is with a 2000 watt Fresnel tungsten light. Stopped working one day. I loved that light. A couple of 18 by 24 inch panels. These are two 1x1 LEDs. The Fresnel again. This is two big light panels and a clamp light on the background with a green gel on a green background to help saturate that color. Just a standard LED light bulb in a fixture. There are times like this where the tungsten effect of a tungsten balanced bulb I really like. I don't always like to balance it back to neutral. Sometimes I think it's fun to leave it warm. Two 1x1 light panels. This was also two 1x1 light panels. This was for a client, and this was done because they also wanted video shot. So I shot video of Olympian Julie Chu here juggling a hockey puck on her hockey stick. And we also did stills. All right, let's see if there are any questions. Derek, we're back.
I'm coming back on. I'm coming back on. A little laggy here on my end. I'm gonna start with one question for you. Do you ever, or when's the last time you have used tungsten other than personal project, experimentation, selfie series, anything like that? When's the last time you've used it professionally?
I'm trying to think, but it definitely would have been when I was shooting video and stills on the same project.
Okay.
So if I'm shooting video and stills on the same project, I will try and light with constant lights. Wait, did you say tungsten or constant?
Yeah, tungsten. Has that been?
Oh, tungsten.
We're gonna have to drag the memory here.
I don't even remember.
It might be longer than you can remember.
I mean, yeah, I do it because it's fun, but for a client, I don't even know.
Is there any applicable use? I mean,
so I don't think that there's probably no tungsten light that is objectively better than an LED, but there are times when they're fun. Like there might be something you like about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's nothing that is gonna there's gonna be better options probably all the way around. There's nothing that other stuff can do that are, there's nothing that tungsten can do that you can't do probably more efficiently or in at least an equal way.
Probably. I don't think that there's any tungsten that an LED can't beat. But tungsten bulbs are so inexpensive. I mean, that Total Lights was what, $125 or something? That Angler was $100. I don't think you can get a comparable LED for that price that's good. I could be wrong. And LED pricing, like, it's astounding how fast that's coming down. What you can get with a good LED that used to be thousands of dollars that now you can get for a few hundred.
And super powerful. It's like LED. I think LED, I catch myself every once in a while thinking, no, I need strobes because I need to freeze motion for this or that. And I'm like, you see some of the stuff that people are doing with constant lights now. It's like,
yeah, it's incredible how fast the technology has changed. I mean, the color used to be terrible. You'd have flicker. They've gotten so much better.
Yeah, it's interesting to see it shape up, especially, I mean, for you, you've been in the game longer than I have. So it's got to be probably even more of just to see how far things have come. It kind of was the same way for so long. We were using the same things. I mean, on the camera side as well, the things they're doing now with cameras. I mean, you look at the global shutter, how that's changing how people are able to use lighting.
Absolutely game changing. The fact that I can use this speed light on the next one of these, I'll get into it, but I've done photos at 32,000th of a second at f2.8 in full sun using a speed light as the light. And it works great because that global shutter can sync at any shutter speed. It's absolutely incredible.
That's insane. Insane. Well, look, it looks like nobody else had any questions about my tungsten lighting. I was so excited to hear about tungsten lighting. It's been a while.
I still like, there's a look to tungsten that I like, but would I use it for client? Probably not.
Yeah. I heard tungsten hot light and I'm like, yeah, there we go. This is a throwback to my early days.
But I didn't really get into HMIs and fluorescent banks, so
we'll do like a throwback lighting series one day. They'll love it. The people will love it. It'll harken back to the old days when things weren't so simple. Now it's like everything's on the table.
I can talk about my photogenic strobes where I had pins to change the power. One pin for 100 watts to each channel, one pin for 400 watts only to A. Turn it off, bleed it.
There was something about those days. I think it was the knowledge that you had to have, the expertise, the hours you had to put in. It's so easy now to go out. I mean,
but that's what's great.
Yeah, technology's wonderful, but it's a different level of appreciation, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't want to be elitist, but what people, not everybody has the time. I put a tremendous amount of time into it because it's what I do for a living. There are a lot of people who do other things for a living and want to do photography and they want to get better and they want to try new things. And it's so much easier to do that now, which is fantastic.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I can't complain. I get paid to sit here and learn all day. So wonderful life, wonderful life. But Tony, always great to have you on. We have 3 more parts coming to everybody who is just tuning in on this and just jumping up on this series now. We'll get to that. We're gonna have plenty of Tony throughout the year, so you guys will never miss out. But head over to the B&H Event Space YouTube page if you haven't already, and check out this and the rest of our live recorded content. But that is all we have for now. Huge thank you again to Tony and Sony for hosting another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space, now in the books. Catch y'all next time.
Thanks, everybody.